head.
No, I want to keep pressing you.
Hey! Who are you people? What do you want from me?
We want the numbers, Mason. That's all we've ever wanted.
Hate hearing the fucking numbers!
It's a broadcast, Mason. The broadcast. Mason, for the last time, where is the number station?
How? The numbers? What are they saying?
0, 0, 1, 3, 5.
All we've ever wanted.
Hey! Oh, sorry I'm late. Traffic in the Riftway was terrible. Anyways, you want to know what the numbers mean? Oh, I will tell you. Welcome back, my students, to the third and final part of the Faction Tutorial series. So far, we have covered everything from the name to the environments to the tactics itself. Now, all that is left is the bread and butter of your faction. The units that make up its armies. Now, when you first open the unit creation page, you will see something akin to the page you see before you in the feed. Now, I know you're thinking, what do these numbers mean? I can't make heads or tails of this. Well, not to worry. We shall be covering every single piece of what this page has to offer. Now, each unit will come with a set amount of stats that are more or less universal. That being movement, defense, HP, etc. But first, let us ask ourselves, what kind of unit do you intend to make? Well, that is where training types come in, each one with their own unique effects and benefits. Infantry is kind of self-explanatory. These are your basic units with basic weapons, particularly melee weapons. Let us look at the Crimson Castellan, for example. They use this training type a lot for their battle line units, both thanks to their good defense and their lack of formation-focused leaders. Up next, we have the Shock training type. This is the closest counterpart to infantry, and the most used training type generally. This will increase the cost of defense value, but it makes the weapons far cheaper as a trade-off. An example of this unit type can be found in the Order of the Broken Mirror, which uses the Shock training type across half of its unit roster, keeping the high cost of their ranged weapons down and keeping their leader away from the front lines. Up next, we have our first special training type. Coming in with a flat cost, the Support training type is allowed to activate with anything else. Now, for context, when typically making formations, one is only allowed to make formations with units of the same training type, unless a leader happens to be present. The exception to this rule is Support. They can deploy formations with anyone they choose. These are typically healers, but they can provide any sort of support you may wish, be it as a mount, increase defense, or even modify their weapons in a certain way. The Support training type will allow them to make full use of such abilities. Now we have the Scout. These are the speedy skirmishers, which utilize high movement to take objectives or target important units. And as a result, this makes their movement cost far cheaper than the typical unit. Now we have the Specialist. As stated in the name, these units are focused around certain abilities, be it custom or otherwise. These typically work best on units with very targeted, dedicated roles, like the majority of the Cyberwolves of Teteroth. And finally, we have our most important training type, the Leader. It is similar to the Specialist, but instead allows you to form formations out of mixed training types. It also grants you access to some notable template abilities, like Leadership and Tactician. The former grants you additional activation points per round. The latter allows you to utilize 2 separate tactics in a single activation, both of which can be quite powerful indeed, if I do say so myself. Now, not every faction wants or needs leaders to function, but most will. This training type also grants a slight discount to HP, allowing you to make these important heroes a little tougher. Remember, my students, when you're choosing these training types, be sure to take into account the unit's role, flavor, and cost, as well as the other units you may have created so far. Think of the synergy you may have planned for them. Think of the playstyle. Think about your faction on a large scale, and base your unit's training types accordingly. With the various training types covered, we now move to the types of defenses a unit may have, starting with hit points. If you're familiar with any kind of game, you'll know that this is the health of the unit, the life force that they possess. Here in If Worlds Collide, we have a set of ranges based on what the unit may very well be, which I will be explaining to you now. Starting with less than 3 HP. These units are the squishiest of the squishy. They're just as likely to die to an enemy unit as they are to be swept by an environmental effect or bit of terrain. These are typically portrayed as ability units with a non-conventional role, or fodder intended to die. There are very few units which can be found in this range, but there are often totems, parasites, animals, or nanoswarms which come apart under the lightest assault. On the alternative, HP this low can represent eldritch entities or ghosts, which have other ways to avoid damage, but dissipate the instant that is bypassed. Up next, we have the typical humans, with 3 to 6 HP. These men and women can take a shot or two from small arms and probably won't die to environmental effects, but any dedicated focus will deal with them very quickly. The higher end of 5 and 6 is just firm enough to act as battle line HP without requiring a horde of models. This range does indeed vary quite widely, but can often be understood as normal. A unit that may be closer to 3 HP might be a zombie, goblin, or the average IWC player. 4 is around average, often interpreted as untrained cultists or peasant militia. And the higher range of 5 and 6 begins to reflect those with some conditioning, such as trained soldiers or combat drones, which through armor, grit, or luck may yet survive the battle. The area around 7 to 10 HP can become a little complex, often making up the actual core of a roster. They'll certainly be able to endure some punishment, even without defensive abilities. But with them, they can become genuinely very tough without breaking the bank. Thematically, it's nebulous. It often continues the previous trend of having some conditioning, but includes the extraordinary and the enhanced. Super soldiers and genuine combat robots tend to fall into this category, as do the smallest of the teeny tiny monsters. Multi-model bases also fall into this category, such as machine guns or heavy weapons teams. If a normal solo human does reach this range, they're often incredibly highly trained or very, very lucky. Lighter heroes and leaders, such as mages, generals, or banner bearers, find their home here somewhere on the higher side too. Next, we have the range of 11 to 16 HP, which is almost entirely reserved for frontline and important units. They will normally have some impact on the game through sheer bulk and points cost, if nothing else. This category is almost entirely reserved for heroes, monsters, and other champions. An angelic paladin or exosuited commando will fall here, as might a vampire, werewolf, or troll. Normal humans which reach this level are the best of the best. Action heroes are the heaviest armored knights, great champions that may very well often lead your roster. Finally, we have the true terrors of the battlefield, those above 16 HP. Those who can take on an entire roster's worth of fire for at least a turn, and normally come at a prohibitive cost. Depending on how you build your faction, you might be able to fit 2 of these guys into your roster, but it's not likely, unless they were the only units you brought. Here is where you place your dragons, mech suits, demigods, giants, eldritch avatars, tanks, and mythical heroes. Most main leaders or named characters fall in this section, but not all of them. When deciding how much HP a unit should get, flavor does play a huge role here. For example, you could make a basic cultist chaff with 7 HP, but would a malnourished madman really be that tough? Up next, we move to defense. This is the stat which helps negate incoming damage. Let us start with those units that have 0 defense. These are unarmored and particularly vulnerable. Normally, more expensive units in this bracket will rely on sheer bulk HP, whilst more common, cheaper ones use raw numbers. Now, on the plus side, low defense such as this is quite an excellent way to keep costs down and HP high if you still want something to take a hit. But this leaves units vulnerable to high attack, low damage weapons. Thematically, these kind of units are peasant hordes with nothing but sackcloth, naked zealots, less nimble animals, or those of far greater corpulence. They can also be vulnerable heroes such as mages, or commanders designed for the back line. Moving up, we'll find most infantry in the category of 1 defense. A not insufficient amount of protection that won't break the bank on top of it. And it can help shrug off a single high damage shot occasionally. Thematically, this is your basic armor. Flak jackets, chainmail, or a healthy survival instinct. They're not dodging bullets like Keanu Reeves or taking hits like Senator Armstrong. But they can dive into cover or turn aside a few glazes. Nothing too crazy. Those with 2 defense have actual armor of some variant, and with a decent amount of HP, they can easily act as a genuine front line, and with some decent abilities, they can survive a real beating. This is where you'll begin to find plated knights and low-grade power armor. Meanwhile, the vanguards and the tanks often fall into the 3 to 4 defense category. It is far more expensive, but this will fully turn aside small arms and preserve a unit's HP from chip damage. This also enters the range where HP can be neglected to a degree, creating units which require high damage weapons to put down for a lower price. This is where you'll find experienced knights and full power armor, along with Keanu Reeves doing the Matrix bullet dodge. And finally, we have the true tanks with 5 or more in defense. Similar to the highest HP bracket, this is where you see roster-defining units. Thematically, these are heavily split between mechs, colossal monsters, demigods, and battle tanks, along with exceedingly heavily armored infantry. Reactive units are parrying projectiles, physical units are wearing the heaviest armor, and energy units are using near impenetrable shields or wards. Overall, defense can be just as important as health, and you should treat it similarly when building a unit. Does it make sense, both mechanically and thematically, for a unit to have the amount of defense it does? Do you want to neglect HP to create a heavily armored knight, or neglect defense to create a brute monster? It is a very abstract stat, representing both armor and combat skill, both of which need to fall into consideration. Speaking of which, now that we've covered defense value, I shall now cover the defense types, of which there are currently 3. First, we have physical defense. These are your simple barriers, armor or shields. Abstractly, it can represent an overwhelming offense, which allows for no response, or sheer size, which prevents any real damage being inflicted. This is normally applied to those with conventional armor or thick skin, and is most common defense type. Next, we have reactive defense. It represents the simplest way to avoid damage, not getting hit. It ranges from ducking into cover, to moving evasively, to parrying bullets, and everything in between. A unit with this defense type is probably quite quick or dexterous, but could also be very stealthy. Units with no armor at all often have this defense type too. Finally, we have the energy defense. It is the most uncommon type, being used both in cases of magical and high-tech protection. Energy shields, wards, enchanted armor, and active defense drones could all fall under this. Heroes are slightly more likely to have this defense type, but it's fairly common in mechs and magical monsters too. And you can also mix and match these types for an increased cost. The reason why you would do so, I will explain later in this video. With defenses now covered, we move on to mobility. This stat determines whether or not your unit is a speedy boy or slow as hell. If a unit has 0 steps of movement, it is typically a weapons team, an object, or occasionally something with an alternate form of movement. However, it is important to note that these units can still extra move and have their movement boosted. So if you want something fully immobile, you'll need to add a custom rule or make the unit function as a token. These can be split into 3 groups: objects, heavy things, and teleporters. Turrets are a good example of objects, in that they require stats to function and will probably have a rule to prevent extra moving, but make up for it with either big weapons or powerful abilities. Bulkier weapons teams are heavy things, with the extra movement representing the team packing up and redeploying at the end of the move. This includes things like field guns, machine guns, cannons, or arcane weapons. Teleporters are normally heroes or elite units which use an ability like blink or token swap instead of regular movement. Quite similar to objects, but instead lean more towards abilities or objective control. Up next, we have very slow or small units which have typically 1 to 5 steps of movement. These units typically offset the debuff by hitting hard. They can typically be found in forms such as zombies and or ogres, heavily armored knights, or shambling horrors. But generally, it'll be undead adjacent units or clumsy monsters. 6 steps is the average standard for IWC, and the standard for a human being. Most battle line units fall in here, whether they're melee or ranged units. Movement wins games, and this is just enough movement to actually have some board presence. Moving up to 7 to 8 steps, this is pushing past the average, but is still a healthy amount for reasonably costed melee units and scouts. You'll comfortably outmaneuver the average unit, and hit those far-off objectives a turn faster. It's also quite cheap, like only 2 to 3 more points than the average unit. This being the typical way to go if you want to build a more tabletop power rather than theme, and is kinda the upper reach on fair movement, unless a unit is focused on speed, as it is typically easy for faster units to feel rough to play against, or to lead to awkward stalemates. Flavor-wise, these are typically super soldiers or experienced scouts. Cavalry, especially armored or large, fit well here as well, along with units with the flying special rules such as drones or familiars. Units with 9 to 12 steps of movement are normally built for speed, and it begins to cost more, and so requires more intentionality in your design process. These units are quite fast by the standards of IWC, crossing the full board in 2 to 3 turns. This becomes slightly more justifiable the larger a unit gets, since it'll struggle on terrain and take more shots. Up next, we have the unit size. This is the typical term referring to the base size of the model in question. Starting with size 1, or 25mm, 28mm base. This is the standard size for IWC, and for good reason. It plays nice with other units, with terrain, and looks good. Flavor-wise, it is everything normal-sized or smaller. Humans, goblins, your wizard's horrible little pet, it all goes there. This can push up to some larger minis, like some monsters. And it's recommended to do this with your size 1 heroes to make it stand out a little. Even if it's just a tactical rock, or them standing a little taller, it really makes a difference. Size 2, 40mm, 50, 60 by 35, and 70 by 25mm. Normally the best size to build your elite units at, taking the edge off their cost, all while keeping them mobile and obscurable. This works wonders if you want to field a more elite unit as your battle line, or if you want to make those champions a touch cheaper, whilst playing nice with formations. Flavor-wise, this range allows for bulky power armor, super soldiers, combat robots, golems, ogres, and all manner of large but not huge creatures. It can also be used if a unit is just particularly bulky, but still human scale. Size 3, 60, 75, 80, 75 by 42, 90 by 52mm. This is often considered the maximum comfortable size for a unit, with its higher ends pushing the limit of what's practical. You'll begin to find areas of the tabletop inaccessible at this size, something hard to justify even with the hefty discount it offers. These are, as expected, big units, like the biggest size you'll really see in a skirmish game big. That can work to your credit if you build around it. Maybe having the rest of the roster act as a support squad for a big mech, tank, or monster. These are typically large monsters, robots, or mechs, or the occasional vehicle adjacent unit, like a cart or APC. Size 4, 100, 105 by 70mm. This size is where things get really uncomfortable when it comes to accessing parts of the map. Granted, this size can be useful to see over terrain or to body block line of sight, but that doesn't really matter if it can't get to your opponent or objectives. This size is typically reserved for things like dragons, tanks, and all the other units which define a roster, even in full-scale wargames. There are ways in which to make this work on IWC scale. Perhaps a dragon-riding knight as a leader, or an alien alpha which needs to stand above its size 3 guards, or a mech with the rest of the roster as its support team. But finding a way to justify it is quite difficult indeed. Difficult, but not impossible. Size 5, 120, 120 by 92, 130 millimeters. This is the more extreme version of the previous category, reserved solely for kaiju, megatanks, sandworms, and other massive things. Far too big to keep a coherent roster, and even if it moves via teleport or other special rules, some parts of the map are going to be inaccessible. This is the scale you'll find Imperial Knights from 40k or other super heavies. It is possible to make this work, but you would need some really unique rules for this. And far greater justification than just, it looks cool. Granted, rule of cool is a thing, but if that's the only thing you're going off of, it's not going to work in the long term. Some rules through which this can work can be like an impact on charge and a trample for units and terrain. Or similarly, if you make a huge tank, you can give it a clumsy turning radius and the ability to roll right through walls. Flavor kinda trumps all here. And since this is directly linked to how a model looks, it's recommended deciding on a size and sticking with it rather than tweaking it as you go. Finally, remember that a unit can look great no matter its size, so don't go cranking up its base for pure spectacle. Finally, we come to the weapons. This is what deals the damage, and what every unit will want something of. Let us start with the knack requirement, or the to hit required for an attack to succeed. Mind you, for reference, we are operating on a D6 system, with a Nat 1 always failing. Knack 2s are almost guaranteed to hit, but a 1 will always crop up eventually. Normally, only the best units will have Knack 2 for any of their weapons, and even then, it's rare. Lifelong duelists, enhanced snipers, legendary warriors, and near impossible to miss attacks go in here. A magic chant, for instance, which harms those who near it, might be a Knack 2 weapon, as the chanter could misspeak on a 1. The more average, good Knack is a Knack 3. You are hitting 2/3 of the time, and for a fair cost. Elites want this more than anything else, since a good weapon needs to hit to be worth having. This knack typically works for spec ops, snipers, super soldiers, beasts with natural weapons, AI targeting assistants, and all the other things which would either cheat a little or do war as a day job and hobby. Knack 4 is the perfect average, a 50-50 on every shot. This is where the majority of battle line units land, since it's affordable but can still work without constant support. They are the trained average, the baseline of competence with their weapon, and not much more. Either more general soldiers like men-at-arms, or specialists whose skill lies elsewhere, like commanders or combat hackers. Knack 5 are not very good. You're hitting about 1/3 of the time, so you either need fire volume or buffs to deal consistent damage. This is good for units with little training or a degree of clumsiness. Militia, cultists, levies, simple robots, undead, they all fit here, as do ogres or colossal alien gladiators. Some non-combatants also go here, since anyone can use a weapon to the degree of stick 'em with the pointy end. Knack 6 weapons are just awful. You're going to be hitting with this very rarely, unless you spend a chunk of activation points or have a hefty buff. These are typically assigned to the worst of the chaff, zombies or malnourished slaves, maybe scrap robots with terrible sensors. Bigger weapons can also go here though too, such as a huge cannon with insane recoil, or a magic item which is ungodly complex to activate. Up next, we have the weapon types. These are quite simple to cover, as they simply describe the range of the weapon. Melee is self-explanatory. They reach the enemies right next to the wielder, or in tabletop terms, base contact. The oldest weapon and the most varied. Swords, axes, spears, knives, chainsaws, laser swords, claws, hooves, fangs, incinerating heat, crushing bolt, or a ghostly touch are all melee weapons. Ranged weapons are a good chunk more expensive, but very effective, as they have infinite range in line of sight, since battles in the colliding worlds are small in scale. But, as a trade-off, they cannot shoot well in melee. If engaged, a ranged weapon will only be able to hit on a natural 6. This is again hugely variable. Guns, bows, lasers, slings, railguns, rockets, a hard stare, all of that goes here. Up next, we have the middle ground of near types. These can attack in melee, but with the trade-off of only having a range of 8 steps. They work quite well on central controlling units or core elite. These weapons normally have some degree of range, but not a ton. Sawn-off shotguns, throwing spears, rocks, magic chants, even particularly long pikes which can justify the range by simply being that long. Heavy is more of a modifier than a type. This gives a discount on the weapon price, at the trade-off of being unable to be used if the unit moved that turn. Could range from huge hammers or stand-space swords, rocket launchers or machine guns, huge pikes or magical lightning. And then there is the custom types. Whilst there's no framework to make your own weapon types, you can always throw it in as an ability. Limited ammo weapons being particularly popular, as is a 3-step range spear or artillery with minimum range. Cost it right, and you'll be good to go. When applying damage and attacks to weapons, there is far too much variation to cover in a video. So, here are some points to consider. You can basically figure out what a weapon's damage and attack should be by looking at the HP brackets of what it should kill and applying defense. A 6 damage shot will kill humans, and kill all but the toughest through a layer of armor. So it probably fits as a warhammer or high caliber round. Weapons don't need a lot of damage or shots to be good. They just need enough to break armor thresholds. 2 attacks at 5 damage is a pretty great rifle, and will put down units under 3 defense if you have a couple of them. The average unit comes with 1 to 2, so try to avoid making your faction's main gun unable to deal damage to them. Things die faster than you think. You don't need a 20 damage gun to kill the enemy leader. If you really want to squeeze out more damage, consider using abilities. Elite units can justify more damage, but consider whether they need it. Overkill isn't the best kind of kill, only a sad waste of points. Melee weapons having higher damage isn't a flavor fail. Yes, a bullet hits harder than a sword, but someone close to you with a sword is going to have a far easier time inflicting an instantly lethal or debilitating wound, as opposed to a shot in the side of the plates. Attacks are hard to measure since IWC round time is variable, but generally, an average soldier is throwing out 1 to 2 a turn, maybe 3 with a fast weapon, but you've got to consider aiming and combat time. Attacks and damage are representative of the wielder as much as the weapon. A hero trained with a longsword will make more attacks with one than a squire, so create different weapons for them, even if they share a name. Finally, we have one last thing to cover for weapons: bypasses, corresponding to the different defense types. If a weapon bypasses every defense type a unit has, it deals a critical hit, doubling its damage before defense is applied. Now mind you, these can be quite expensive for obvious reasons, but vastly improve a weapon's damage if you have the right one or ones. Now, before I cover these types, we must note there happens to be a trend in a few beginner-made factions to give everything a bypass, vastly increasing the cost of every weapon and making them feel pretty rough to play against. These are more designed for specialized weapons, which mean to break armor of a certain kind. A standard rifle probably doesn't bring physical bypass, but an anti-material rifle does. In essence, hold to flavor and be sparing with them. The most common defense type is physical, and the same goes for bypass. If you want to kill those big armored brutes and monsters, this is the thing to do it with. But it is pretty expensive on a high power weapon. This can be everything from uranium-tipped rounds to an armor-piercing lucerne, wielded by a holy champion. If it goes fully through physical barriers, it goes here. That is the most solid qualifier for bypass on the flavor front. It needs to fully bypass whatever type of defense it's against, no matter how thick that defense. Reactive bypass is less common, but arguably more useful. A lot of factions run medium HP units with reactive defense, so this can be a good way to clear them. These include flamethrowers, homing bullets, caltrops, and many tailed whips. If you can't dodge it, then it can go here. That's not to say a nuke should go here, since not dodging it is more a side effect than its intended purpose. Finally, the most common defense type on heroes, especially softer ones, energy bypass, can be quite effective on snipers or any other assassin archetype. This normally represents some sort of magic or high-tech on the weapon. A magical lance of light which can pierce wards, or a vibroblade which overloads shields. A less common angle could be certain fighting styles. Maybe something similar to Dune's shield fighting, or a style used by a witch hunter. Just like defense types, you can mix and match bypasses, which bypass all in essence, doubling your damage for a hefty cost. Though it's not really worth it unless you're doing it for flavor. Note that while these are very expensive in its base form, you can also apply them using certain abilities, or place them on very cheap weapons like a 2x3 magic dagger, which comes out quite well if it's up against something it bypasses. Note, these take a little more restraint and require a focus on flavor to feel good, but should absolutely be used. And with that, I conclude this surprisingly long lecture on how to create a faction. If you stayed around this far, thank you so much for watching. And I do apologize for the late upload. But I do hope you enjoyed this video, especially since this will be the last one for the year. I am a little burnt out and do need a break. Not to worry, I'm not quitting. Just a break. Come the new year, I will be uploading a State of the Archives video covering what I have planned for the year of 2026, along with potentially some changes to the upload schedule and content length. But we'll see where the year takes us. With that, I wish you all happy holidays, and I will see you next year.